Rocketed from the dying planet Krypton in the Earth-2 universe, Kara Zor-El's spacecraft landed her on Earth 60 years later than her cousin Kal-El, the Earth-2 Superman. Aging only 20 years during her flight through space, she assumed the name Power Girl and used her superpowers to aid the Justice Society of America. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of From the Vault. Ricky Rocks here, as always, your master of ceremonies with the action figure review. Retro toys are my thing, in case you didn't know that, and today we're going all the way back to 2001 with one of the first female action figures put out by DC Direct, the one and only Power Girl. Cult favorite, a lot of DC fans. For those of you who don't know, essentially, Power Girl is the Supergirl of Earth 2. Those of you who know comic books know about the multiverse, the many different numbered parallel Earths and so forth and whatnot. So, Power Girl was created in the 70s. She was essentially the Supergirl of Earth 2. Zoe likes to get in on these two. That's a good girl, Zoe. She just, has to have her input. Don't worry, Zoe, you gave me all your notes. I should have got an extra chair. Show off the mess. Oh my god.
That dog blew up again.
Yeah. So as I was saying, Power Girl, Supergirl of Earth 2, introduced in the 1970s in All-Star Comics as an older, stronger, tougher version of essentially Supergirl. Now, in the 1980s, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, all of the parallel universes were merged into one, so there was no more Earth 2 or any other parallel reality. Power Girl was sort of folded into the new continuity. So, since there were no other Kryptonians and no Supergirl yet in that reality, they had to mess with Power Girl's origins a little bit. So for the late 80s through mid-90s or so, they changed it so she was an Atlantean and given superpowers by some wizard or something. Turned out to be a ruse later on. Then in 2005 or so, with the Infinite Crisis crossover, when they brought back the multiverse, they just explained that, she'd always been from Earth 2, and they just sort of wiped out the Atlantean sorcerer nonsense. It never really fit her anyway, so just having her be Supergirl from another dimension is simple enough. So, still Kara Zor-El, but different take on the character. Again, definitely has a different look, different costume. In the canon, basically, this version of Kara decided she didn't want to just be looked at as an offshoot of Superman or an appendage of Superman, and thus the completely different costume and name, everything like that. So I always liked that about the character. It showed an independent streak from very early on, and that's kind of continued to this day. She doesn't have a ton of interaction, or didn't, at least throughout the 90s, early 2000s. She didn't have a ton of interaction with the other Superman-related characters. There was always a little bit of tension with her and Supergirl, who's essentially being parallel versions of the same person. Some friction there between the two of them, because they're not the same person, essentially. They have different attitudes, different outlooks on things, so, that was always interesting. They would show them together, but it didn't happen all that often, so. Anyways. So, Power Girl was a character who didn't get a ton of attention in action figure form until DC Direct took their shot in the early 2000s. This was one of the Justice Society related figures, one of the first female superheroes after Wonder Woman, Wonder Girl, Zatanna. There was a few. Power Girl still very early in the line. As an early DC Direct figure, there was a lot of up and down to it, just like everything else. A lot of good, a lot that definitely could be improved upon, but this was still the first ever Power Girl action figure. So just like when we talked about the Alan Scott, a couple of the other DC Direct figures, When you get somebody's rookie figure, it's always a big deal. I got this one on a little bit of a discount because the package is pretty banged up, as you can see. But again, I take everything out, usually for you guys, so I don't care if the package is a little banged up. I'm fine with it. It saves me a couple bucks here and there so I can get more figures. As long as the figure's in good shape, that's all I really care about. But yeah, this one has seen better days. The banner up top is sun faded, so this was probably like in a shop display or something, maybe in a window of a store for a while, because it's a very faded yellow compared to how it usually would look. We're going to actually see on the back when I flip it around. Yeah, see, that's the basic yellow on the banner. So yeah, the front side definitely faded over time through light exposure. On the back we get some of the other DC Direct figures that were available at the time. I have a few of these. Sinestro, great figure. Mirror Master one's okay. Not a lot to that one. There's a quaintness to these early DC Direct figures that I just love. They're simple, but they're direct and to the point. They show you who the character is and what they look like, and even though there's a lot of pre-posing going on and not a ton of actual articulation, they still managed to get the point across. These were pretty much the best representation of a lot of DC characters that you could get at this point in time. And for characters like Power Girl, Alan Scott, Jay Garrett, the other Justice Society characters, these were the first figures, period, you could get for most of these. So I dig that the most. You got the nice little artwork shot of Kara on the back, as well as Bio, some superpowers there. She mostly has the same powers as Superman and Supergirl. Not exactly the same, excuse me. For example, as she comes from a parallel universe, the kryptonite of this universe doesn't affect her, so she's immune to that. However, she's still vulnerable to magic, which seems odd to me because, as I understand it, magic works differently from dimension to dimension too. So I don't know specifically. I don't know. Maybe it's just like a catch-all. Any kind of magic, Kryptonians are vulnerable to. I don't know. I'm overthinking it again. I got a habit of doing it. So anyway, first ever Power Girl action figure. Really excited to have it. I have a couple others. DC Direct did a few that I'm aware of, and they're all pretty good to various degrees. This one being the first, you know, you're going to see a lot of things that were improved upon later on. We're going to take it out of the package in just a little bit. Pretty easy to do because part of it's already been peeled off. Only a little bit, but it's going to make it really easy to get into this thing. And yeah, we're going to be back in just a minute. We're going to take a look at the first ever Power Girl action figure, courtesy of DC Direct. Come back in just a minute. We're going to take a look out of the package in all its majesty. There she is in all her power and majesty, the one and only Power Girl, as made by DC Direct back in 2001. The first ever action figure of this particular character. Really cool to see. You know, there weren't even a ton of Supergirl figures back in those days, let alone Power Girl. So this was really neat to see. Definitely a very, very cool action figure, sculpt and detail wise. I mean, really, really close to the look of the figure. Her outfits have changed a lot over the years, her haircuts have changed, but this is pretty much a clean, iconic depiction of Power Girl as she looked most of the time in the comic books. I mean, you got it all. You got the rope collar for the cape. You got the boots and gloves, which really make the character stand out. Really always a fan of that look. And of course, the majestic boob window, as much of a feature of Power Girl as anything else. There's pretty much a couple things that you can always associate with the character. The blonde bob haircut being one of them. You got the short cape with the rope, and of course you have, canonically, in universe, the greatest rack in the entire DCU, Power Girl. This figure actually a little modest compared to how she's drawn typically, but you know, still a lot to appreciate there. and it's just got to be said. You can't talk about Power Girl without addressing these things. You just can't do it. But yeah, love the sculpt, love the colors, love the costume, love the detailing. Don't love the articulation. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but for now we're going to take a nice, close, in-depth look at the figure. Appreciate it for what it is, looking at it. Really, really clean sculpt, really great looking figure. Great looking, not so much great posable. We'll talk about that in a minute, but as far as looking good on a shelf, I mean, check it out, dig it. I really like the figure for what it is. We're going to talk about what it isn't in just a moment. But yeah, I mean, for the standards of 2001, this was definitely a great way to introduce Power Girl into the DC Direct action figure line. First ever figure for this character. We're really happy to finally have it after all these years. This is another one that slipped by me early on. Really happy to have it now, so happy to share it with all of you guys. We're going to be back in just a second, but for now, take another look. Alright, so here we are again. This is Power Girl up close, out of the package. Oh man, I'd like to get up close to Power Girl. That is for certain. But, you know, she'd probably crush me. It'd be worth it. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So, yeah, so there's a lot to like about this figure. Again, first ever figure of this character. One thing I want to mention right off the bat, I was able to get her standing up before on the base, and I got her standing up now, but that's a little bit tricky, as it is with a lot of the early DC Direct action figures. Some of them like to stand better than others. So far, I tried 2 different stands out on this figure. It does have a hole in the foot for a base, but I couldn't find one that specifically fit the hole. The hole's a little small. If I keep digging, I'm sure I'll find one. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of accuracy to the comics with this figure. The haircut is pretty much on point. She got that bob haircut that really nobody else had, always made her stand out. You got the rope and clasps at the cape, very old school. She's meant to, even though she was introduced in the 1970s, she's meant to represent the character that existed around the 40s and 50s, so she's got that kind of throwback cape, similar to the kind of cape Alan Scott wore, the rope and the clasps, and so that's really cool. Really like the cape. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. I like what they went with here. I think it looks really good. Really like that. Sometimes the cape is just standard attachment at the neck. Sometimes it goes across and under her one arm and clasps that way. It's fine either way to me. This is the more typical and classic version, so I do like that. Got the cuffed boots. Very sexy. Always really like that. Always really like the cuffed boots. You got the high heels. She can get away with that because she can fly pretty much everywhere, so she doesn't have to worry about running in heels, so she's covered as far as that goes. Love the gloves. Always thought that was a really cool part of her outfit. You know, sometimes there's extra detailing put on them, sometimes not. Here she just has the classic old school superhero gloves. Very nice. The belt, sometimes it's red, it's usually red, sometimes it's colored blue, but here, classic red. Of course you got the white leotard bodysuit, and showing off the goods. That's what she's all about. In at least one explanation, it's been said that she has that just so it's easier for her to hit guys in the face while they're distracted. It's the way to go. I can see why that would work. Good for her. You know, making use of, you know, what the Kryptonian birthing matrix gave you, I guess. So yeah. Now, a lot, as I said, great about this figure. I mean, even the hair. Check out the sculpting on the hair. That's pretty cool stuff. I mean, you know, in the hands of a lesser artist, it would just look like a big yellow blob on her head, but they really took some time and really did a good job on the strand sculpting. sculpting, what have you, the bangs. And again, it's a hard look to pull off. I mean, even in the comics, you know, sometimes her haircut doesn't look so good depending on who draws it, but sometimes it's a real winner. And they did a pretty good job on that here, I feel. So, just at a glance, this is an excellent representation of Power Girl, especially for her first ever action figure. Now, again, unfortunately, as you dig deeper, just like with anything else, you're going to find some more problems, and there's quite a few with this figure. Biggest one being, stop me if you heard this before, articulation. DC Direct, never great with that. And this one, I gotta say, despite the specific example of where it's a little bit ahead of the game, it's like one step forward, 4 steps back in a lot of ways. So you get the head, 360, swivel, go all the way around, okay? Again, no up and down motion back then. This was 2001, so you just got the swivel peg. Pretty much fine. The arms, again, you have just the swivel and no lateral movement. But what you do have is you've got a swivel cut right at the middle of the shoulder. Again, 2001, later figures would get better at that. Nowadays, you'd have like a peg in there where the shoulder meets the bicep, and it would swivel there, and it would be a cleaner looking cut. But this was pretty ingenious for 2001. That was actually pretty innovative to have that at all. So that's actually really cool. I dig that, and it does help the posability of the figure as far as helping to get her arms into some different poses. And again, you got the single jointed elbows. So far they're holding up pretty good. Early DC Directs, especially female figures, I might worry a little bit about the elbows over time. Sometimes they deteriorate. So far, so good though. They just feel a tiny bit loose. I can see the peg kind of giving out at some point. And that's as far as it goes. No articulation at the glove seam, like a lot of figures would find a way to sneak in. They didn't do that here. Nothing at the wrist. But most disappointing at all, the biggest problem this figure has is that the entire body is one solid piece. Now, I don't need to tell you to go ahead and take a good long look at her body, but I'm going to do that because nothing at the hips, nothing at the knees, nothing at the boots or ankles. Her entire body is one solid piece of plastic. Only articulation is at the head and the arms. So that is kind of crummy because it affects the posability of the figure. Like, I can get her standing on a perfectly flat surface, but if you're in a spot where you have her posed in a specific place and she doesn't want to stay there, you're kind of beat because you can't do anything to fix it except get a base that works. You can't adjust the feet or the legs whatsoever to make her stand. So I'm lucky right now, but if you're unlucky, you're beat because you can't adjust anything. That's a real bummer because a couple episodes ago we looked at the first ever Wonder Woman DC Direct action figure, and she had articulation at the hips and the knees, so I don't really understand why they didn't do it for this figure, other than... Okay. The only reason I can think of for why they didn't use any articulation at all in the legs is because, as I've mentioned in other videos, DC Direct would very often make a choice to maintain the clean, seamless look of a character's sculpt and not want to dirty it up by having a bunch of lines and seams and joints, and thus where the figure representation and reputation of being posable statues started to come from. The early DC Direct figures especially, some of them had more articulation than others, but a lot of them, like this one, not so good. I will give credit though, even though it's a primitive attempt, the seams at the shoulders were pretty ingenious by the standard of the day. So I do give them props there. But you could have had some articulation in the glove seams. Even at the wrist, I don't think that would have uglied it up at all. I think it would have been fine. and especially at the hips, to not at least have the legs go forward and back. I could see in the package that there were no knee joints, so I was already kind of cranky about that before I opened it, but I assumed originally that at least the legs would move, but nope. One solid piece, and nothing at all, so it is what it is. But sculpt-wise, looks great. I mean, that's what Power Girl looks like. That is a perfect representation of the character. It's just a real bummer because there's only so much you can do with her. There's only so many poses you can get her into. And, you know, that's a real bummer. We saw with the Wonder Woman figure, the DC Direct was capable of so much more even before this figure came out. So that's a little bit disappointing. Looks-wise, I love it. I'm definitely going to have a lot of fun displaying this figure along with my other JSA figures. That's going to be cool. She looks good, but you can't really do a lot with her. I do like that at least there's enough to do with the arms to give you some variety. There are other Power Girl figures, two specifically that I'm aware of, and one of which I have is the one from Infinite Crisis, I think was the line. That's a really good one from DC Direct. And I believe they did one from the Ed McGuinness line for JSA. It was either JSA Classified or Superman Batman. I think it was Superman Batman, actually. That one was pretty good, too. But yeah, there's been a few different Power Girl figures over the years. The Mattel one is great. We're going to talk about that one of these days for sure. The DC Universe Classics one. Just don't have it handy right now, or we would have done a compare contrast like we did with Alan Scott. We'll get there. But yeah, for now, this is a pretty cool figure. I like it. I wanted to love it. I love it for what it is, you know, it's acceptable. But even by 2001 standards, not having any articulation in the legs is pretty weak. I do have to take major points off for that. But as far as everything else goes, the rest of the figure, they definitely did their best and knocked it out, you know. This was the only Power Girl figure available for about 5 or 6 years. Then they did a couple other ones that improved upon this one quite a bit, but, you know, you should always try to get any character's rookie figure if you can. So definitely do recommend picking it up. Just know what you're getting. Know that it's not really going to be much more than a posable statue. But it's a good-looking one, and it's a historic one, being the first ever action figure of a really cool character, one and only Power Girl. So I definitely recommend it. I just have to take points off for the total, inexplicable, inexcusable laziness on the leg articulation. But everything else about it is really great. So thumbs up overall. Just big red X next to it for one big thing. Also just want to call out the packaging again real quick here. We have pretty simple background. All the DC Direct early figures, as I mentioned, had their own packaging, which I do like. Here, it's kind of plain. You just get a shot of Wildcat and a cityscape in the background. Not terrible, just kind of generic. I'm not sure exactly what I would have expected for Power Girl, but I don't know. I think they could have done maybe something a little bit more dynamic. I don't hate it. It's just so far of the DC Direct figures we've looked at, that backdrop is a little flat by my account. But what can you do? It's still pretty cool. I just want to show that off really quick. But yeah, so she doesn't really like to stand. You gotta fuss with it. There we go. So, since I got her standing up there, oh wait, okay. I can't help myself. All right, so yep, it begins. It begins. We're on the path. I gotta get a couple more. I gotta get Jay Garrick and a few other characters. But yeah, the Justice Society begins to form. I love it. I love it. I actually have a lot more Justice Society figures packed up in the vault somewhere, but yeah, couldn't help but do this real quick because two of the earliest DC Direct action figures, and they really did show a lot of love to the Justice Society early on with DC Direct action figures, so I definitely really loved that because they had never had action figures before. So getting them right out of the gate was a huge, huge win for DC Direct in my book. somebody who loves the legacy characters and the history of DC. Really cool to see. But yeah, we talked about Green Lantern before, and now we're going to just wrap it up. Again, Power Girl, awesome figure for what it is. I have to take points off, but don't let that discourage you. I mean, if all you're going to do is have the figure stand on your shelf looking cool, then it's still worth picking up, and you can find it relatively inexpensive. You just got to look around. Not hard to find at all. Again, I got one in the damaged package to save a few dollars, but you can find them in good packaging too. It's not hard. She is really easy to find, and I do recommend picking her up. If for no other reason, then it's a big historic piece of history. The fact that it's the first ever action figure based on Power Girl. Can't go wrong with anybody's rookie figure. So that's going to do it here for this episode of From the Vault, Ricky Rock's Retro Action Figure Review. Really excited to talk about Power Girl today. We're going to be back pretty soon with something totally different, but something pretty similar. You'll see what I mean. We'll be back then, not now. See if you can wait that long. Until then, like, share, subscribe, comment, do the deal. We'll catch you next time on From the Vault. This is Ricky Rock's God of Thunder, Lord of Rock and Roll, icon of old school, coming at you, and we'll see you real soon. And that's not a threat, that's a promise.